Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 3, Episode 2, Monday, January 11th, 2016. My name is Graeme Tyler. With me tonight is Tyler Fitch. Unfortunately, Melissa Daphne was not available to join us tonight, so we're still waiting for our first episode with all three of us. But we have guest host tonight, Ryan Zunner from the Big Z Lacrosse Network. I'm assuming that's Big Z Lacrosse Network. So Ryan, thanks for welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me be here. It's a pleasure.
All right, we've got a couple things to talk about tonight. Obviously, there were 4 games last weekend that we want to get to. The only other news that I want to make sure we get to is the new commissioner. George Daniel resigned a few months ago, but said he was going to stay on as commissioner until a new one was chosen. Apparently, they went through quite a process to do this. I think somebody said, I think it was on the Stealth Classified podcast, that it was like a 7-month process, and they had 100 plus people that they were looking at. They interviewed about 10, and they ended up with a guy named Nick Sakevich. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. I'm pretty sure that's right. He is a former executive with Major League Soccer. He was one of the founders of the MLS, actually, about 20 odd years ago. And he's been an executive and an owner with, I believe, 3 different teams. So he certainly knows the pro sports market. He certainly knows the pro sports market from a niche sport point of view. We didn't get somebody from like the NHL or the NBA. So this might be a good thing. He did have a press conference the other day where he was talking about what his plans for the league. Obviously, he didn't go into too many specifics, but he did give a few ideas of where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do. It did sound like expansion was big on his list. He talked about getting to kind of a sweet spot of 16 teams, which looks pretty aggressive considering there's only 9 now. The league was up to 13 6 or 7 years ago, and then started dropping again. So 16 seems pretty aggressive, like I said. We'll see how he decides to get there. He did say that he didn't want to just go places for the sake of going places, and having a committed owner is one of the major key points of going anywhere, which is a good thing, because it didn't seem like Jim Jennings was quite as concerned about that. He just wanted a team someplace, and hopefully the owner doesn't suck, and that was about it. Ryan, what were your thoughts about the new commissioner?
I like the move. Nick started off with the MLS, and what I liked about him is, in order for him to help build the MLS, he knew he had to build soccer as a sport, which I think he did. Soccer's fastly becoming one of the more popular sports in the United States. And I think that's really what the NLL needs in comparison to box lacrosse. They need to build it from a grassroots standpoint, and I just like the way he did. Talked about building the digital platform. I think that's something that's definitely missing in lacrosse, is I guess the digital coverage and high quality apps and stuff like that. So definitely just to build the fan experience, number one. And then of course he talked about the careful expansion. I like the move. I'm not sure if there was anybody really out there that could commit themselves to the NLL as much as Nick is. So I'm happy with the move.
Yes.
What about you?
Yep. I like the plans of expansion, and selfishly, I hope he looks at it. They can get owners that maybe aren't from the area, because the last round of expansions really started off that way, but now we have Bruce Urban from Edmonton owning a team in Saskatchewan, and you've got Denise Watkins from San Jose owning a team in Vancouver. So hopefully they can get owners maybe to buy teams in the right place instead of their place, and that would be great. I really would love to see the I-5 quarter on the West Coast running again, where Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver are just a straight shot to each other, and get some rivalries going there that are practical driving distance for the West Coast. That would be great, because they have that with Toronto, Buffalo, and Rochester. They're all fairly close together. This would be a little bit further over here, but people will drive 3 hours because that's just the distance. And to get to the big places, they would have good draws when the road teams come to town. Build some strong rivalries. It would be great. The MLS has an entire subset culture or whatever it is called the Cascadia Cup, which is the MLS teams in Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. They play each other as part of the regular season, but the winner of that gets a thing called the Cascadia Cup. So hopefully he'll want to pull from that experience in MLS and bring it into the NLL. That'd make me happy. And the great awareness part that I heard him mention, he was on that Stealth Classified podcast, was MLS. They had to build it and try and find players, and he knows in the NLL he's working with the best players in the sport, period. So it's not a trouble with the product, it's the trouble with marketing, etc. So he feels that having that part tackled, it makes it some expansion plans more feasible, he hopes, and so do I.
Right, so it does sound, actually, from a lot of other people that I've heard talk about the whole situation, that everybody's pretty pumped about this. That I mean, you don't want to be too overly optimistic and say, there we go, all our problems are solved. But he's obviously pretty new to the job and he hasn't done much of anything yet. But it does sound like he's got some ideas. I did think when listening to the press, not the press release, but the introduction, that he had done some thinking already about things that he wanted to do. He wasn't just, well, I'm here now and now I'm going to start looking around and trying to figure out what to do. It sounded like he had some fairly concrete plans of where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. So hopefully they come to fruition. And like you said, Ryan, about the digital area of things, that's something I know that Paul Tutka has been talking about on Twitter for a year or two now, and a lot of other people as well. Part of that is switching broadcast providers. It seems that every year there's a new broadcast provider. So hopefully we can get something stable there. And I kind of like the YouTube thing a couple of years ago. There may have been other issues with that, but it was certainly a lot easier to figure out where the games were going to be when you just go to YouTube and there it is. Anyway, so good luck to Nick Sakevich, and hopefully things go well in his new job. That's about all the news. Obviously, there were 4 games, so we'll get to those. First, we'll start with the brand new team in Georgia. They lost their first game last week, but this would be their home opener, their debut in Georgia. And they got a pretty darn good crowd down there, 9,000 plus people. They've been pushing the team in Georgia apparently all summer, just judging by their online presence anyway. And they got a good amount of people down there. It looked pretty good. The Toronto Rock didn't seem to think so. Anyway, they didn't have a great game. But Georgia played really well. Obviously, they won 12-7. Keeping the Rock to only 7 goals is pretty good. Now, the Rock were without Josh Sanderson. They only really found that out a couple weeks ago. And then they had Colin Doyle back, so they kind of weren't the same Rock offense that they had last year. But quite honestly, Brodie McDonald just played a great game. I thought I was going to say Minnesota. The Georgia defense was pretty solid. The Georgia offense is just going to be a lot of fun to watch this year, I think. Even with Lyle and Miles Thompson had an assist each and nothing else. I mean, they were part of the offense. They just didn't show up on the stat sheet. But Randy Stotts had a great game. Kyle Matisse it looks like he's having a great season as well. So they've got a bunch of really exciting people. Um, so, Ryan, did you see this one?
Yeah, I did. I caught about the little over the first half, or into the second half, I should say. And just I was going to say Minnesota again. Georgia's ball movement was great. All those behind the backs. It looks like that same group of players has been playing for years together because just their chemistry and IQ out on the floor is tremendous. I thought Johnny Paulus had a great game. I haven't really seen a whole lot of I guess good things out of him since he's left Rochester. He had kind of a shaky start in Vancouver, and then another shaky start when he was playing in Minnesota last season. So I definitely think he's finally coming into his own without being around that great core offensive unit in Rochester. Also, like you said, Miles and Lyle only held to 1 assist, yet the team still pulls through. So they definitely have that big depth, and I think they have a lot more to come throughout the season.
Tyler, you didn't manage to see this one?
I was watching the first half. I was waiting to head over to the arena in Langley, and I don't know, the young Swarm. They just came out and played a faster game, and I don't associate the Rock with being old, but they looked a little bit bigger and slower than what I saw with the Swarm for what I was watching, and pretty impressed with the last 2 weeks out of the Georgia team there, and they're in position to really turn some heads if this carries on for the rest of the month and get off to a hot start. People didn't really know what they would have for sure, and um, new coaching's phenomenal. Roster of young guys who basically have played together with the Iroquois National and Six Nations team. So 4 out of the 5 power play guys, I don't know who the 5th one is, but maybe they've all played together at some point. They can really go out there and cause some damage and just go have fun. And they're getting paid to play ball. And just when you're young, that can be just feel great. And they just go hard. Good things to come. Plus the great crowd they had, over 9,000. They do have all fall to prep up this one game, but the win will definitely help get people back, and that'll be definitely the key thing. I've had stealth games. First game of the year has always been huge, and then they drop off. But they positioned themselves and produced on the floor for hopefully a good bump in starting strong on and off the field.
Ryan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just thought Brody McDonald played a great game between the pipes. Biggest question mark for me for Minnesota, or the Swarm franchise just in general, has been goaltending. Last season we didn't really see that great of goaltending between McDonald and who was the other one?
Zach Higgins.
Yeah, Zach Higgins. Yeah. So, but this season though, both of them had a pretty good start. Definitely with that home opener, McDonald looked really, really great. I think in the last quarter, I think he maybe allowed 1 goal, if that. So great performance out of him, and if he can build on it, Minnesota's going to have a great both offense and defense.
Yeah, the the Minnesota Swarm had a really good goaltender tandem 4 or 5 years ago with Evan Kirk and Tyler Carlson. And then the next season that didn't really work so well, and then Evan Kirk was sent east and Carlson was sent north, and so maybe they're trying the double goalie thing again. And like you said, it didn't work that well last year, but I mean it's only 2 games in, but it looks like it's working pretty well so far this year. All right, move on to the Calgary Buffalo game, and I didn't see this one at all. Don't believe Tyler did either, but Ryan, you were there. But what did you see?
Well, offensive wise, I don't think the Bandits had a great outing. I talked to Troy Cordingley after the game, and he didn't seem to think so as well. A lot of missed shots, a lot of post dingers, but the Buffalo defense played real well. I don't think there was a goal scorer on Calgary that had more than 2. So the defense really knew who to shut the players off. Dane Doby, Jeff Shatler, they were limited a lot during the game. So defensive wise, I thought they played pretty well. Both goalies were pretty outstanding too. I think the shots were close to 45, 50 each. So it was a great outing by the defense. Offensive wise, the only person who I saw that really had a great game for the Bandits was Dane Smith. He had that great game-winning goal. I think that went viral on NLL's Facebook page, where he just broke that defender's ankles. So the offense has a lot to work on, but I think defensively wise, the Bandits are set, and Calgary had a great game too. It could have gone either way.
Do you see much of a difference in the offense without John Tavares?
I'm not sure if it's definitely not point production, but I just think maybe like that leadership role is kind of missing. I know they brought in Darryl Veltman to try to fill that role, but they just don't seem, I don't know, as set up as in past years with the structure out there. A lot of times players don't really look like they know where they're going. Maybe some miscommunications. But I know with the way Troy Cordingley talked and John Tavares, now that he's the offensive assistant coach, I think they're really going to work hard on that in the upcoming practices.
All right. Next game, Colorado and Rochester. I didn't see any of this one. Actually, I saw a few minutes of this one, but the feed was kept dropping for me, so I didn't really see enough to form an opinion on it. Tyler, did you see this one at all?
No, I was watching Georgia game instead, so I was on my tablet, so I wasn't flipping back and forth as easily as browser tabs, and I missed it. But 16 points in a row, 2 weeks in a row from Colorado is impressive. That's a lot of goals. They're really clicking offensively, and looks like they made some good choices with their offseason moves, picking up like Callum Crawford, etc.
Yeah, so anytime you can put 16 goals up against Matt Vince, you're doing all right. Ryan, did you see this one?
I did not. Just caught, I guess, a few updates on Twitter about it. I know early on Colorado was leading. Well, Rochester was leading pretty good early, and then Colorado ran away with it in the second. But it was definitely a battle between quarters by the way the score sheet looks. I know there was some controversy with something about a challenge. I think it was like Wardle's goal and Noble. Somebody threw the flag for the challenge, and like it was like 2 goals before that got challenged instead of the first one. I don't know if you guys caught any of that.
From what I read, it sounded like there was a goal that was possibly scored but waved off, and then during the next play, like the ensuing play after that, another goal was scored. And so they ended up having to review the first one to see if it was a goal, and if it was a goal, the second one would have been canceled because then everything after the goal was scored would have been negated. So presumably the first one was waved off again, and then they reviewed the second one. But I didn't actually see what happened. That was my impression anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so not much to say about that one. But the other one, I'm going to let Tyler take the lead on this one since you were at the game. And I did ask before we started the show if you just wanted to pretend this whole thing never happened. But let's talk about Vancouver.
Sure. I got a little weekend trip up to Vancouver, and the highlight of my trip was learning that Canadian money is now see-through. That might explain how great the game was. Good crowd, 4,200 plus, which in the arena of just over 5,000, so 4 to 5 seats full for them is great. But they just came out and the Stealth came out and laid an egg. I don't know. They started off a little back and forth in the first quarter, and then second quarter, New England kind of pulled away. In the second half, they demolished the Stealth. There's not a good, no good words can be describe any aspect of the game. If I had to reach for something that was good, is I don't know, potentially the Stealth depth that they brought up Jarrett Toll from the practice roster to fill in for Matt Beer's suspension, and he was taking face-offs. He ran on the first shift of the short man D, and was generally contributing in that way. So the fact that you have a guy come off the practice roster and do those 2 roles is great. But I don't know, the offense, they were just not quite catching all the passes, not quite crisp. I guess they didn't really know what the whole New England offense was going to look like with Sean Evans in there, but it was same old Sean Evans setting everybody up or doing the work himself, and nobody stopped him. He continues his MVP performance from last year and carries it forward. Highlight of the night, I would say, though, is they had a little special ceremony honoring Jeff Zwicky and bringing him back in. I hadn't seen him too many times in Vancouver that I've gone up since the team moved. But yeah, he's still, I think, second all time in stealth points or goals, one of the two. And so they had him out in a nice new 67 Zwicky jersey and a little highlight video for him. Not a huge thing, but it was an important thing to do to go back into the history of the team and pull somebody in and recognize them that way. That was a great moment. I think this is just my guess, but after the game, the players went out and signed autographs for all the fans and then disappeared for quite a while before anybody came up and around later. So I'm guessing that there was maybe a team meeting after the game we played one game. It was completely awful. We need to turn things around, and it's not a conversation people want to have on the opening game, but they need to change something. Nobody was really talking about in grand scheme of things. I think they just need to clean things up, not like different players, different anything like that. It's just play a game up to the potential. Everybody was just a little bit off, and so collectively it was just a huge tire fire on the field. But if everybody sharpens things up, they'll be absolutely fine, and they can do great things. But I think everybody had to be reminded of that after the game, is my opinion. So I think next week will be a different experience than this week was. Well, at least I sure hope so. Yeah, that's my thoughts. You got any thoughts there, Ryan?
I just caught the fourth quarter, but yeah, by the time I caught it, New England had ran away with it. I guess I don't know. Was it defense? Is there any really unit you could blame, or just overall it was?
I thought that. I mean, they gave up 17 goals, but I didn't see any glaring problems with the defense. I think the more glaring issues was the offense not quite crisp on some passing and moving the ball around, or maybe not getting set up quick enough. Obviously, the defense was either giving up shots or too many shots for Penny. The shots on goal were even or within one for each other. But the stealth between Levis and Penny were only at 70% save percentage, and maybe it was just goaltending wasn't there that night because they weren't really just running through and doing whatever they want. Just had a lot of shots falling, and the stealth only scored 7. Big defense, big defenders for New England. Kind of interrupted their flow. They couldn't just do what they wanted. But the typical stealth offense the last couple of years, and again Saturday, is to kind of work the ball around the outside and look for a shot. And nobody was driving. McCready did once or twice, and he's done that in the past, but it's not their standard offense. So they need to get to the cage and force the issue more. So because of that, even though the score is they gave up a ton of goals, I thought the issues were more on the offense than the defense.
So Evan Kirk played a really good game in the New England net. Excuse me, Eric Penny was not great, and I'm sure this is not the start he was looking for his starting career. And Chris Levis did come in and played part of the second half, and I thought he did a pretty good job, especially for a guy who's 38, 39, and hasn't played in the league in 3 years. So he did a pretty decent job, did what was expected of him. By that point, I think the game was pretty much out of hand anyway. Yeah, what else did I have to say about that? Not much. I like the way Joel McCready looks. I don't know how many times we've been talking about the the stealth offense and what it's going to look like with Reese Dutch and Garrett Billings and Corey Small, and it seems that McCready's name doesn't get mentioned all that often with that group, and he's not going to he may not be the guy who puts up 80 or 90 points, so you don't mention him, but I mean, he looked really good, I thought, on Saturday night. Obviously didn't score an awful lot, but I like what he brings to the stealth offense. What do you think, Tyler?
I agree. I don't want to go all negative on it, but like Corey Small kind of disappointed me. McCready had great flashes, just like you said. They did not play the young forward Jordan Durston or Jordan something.
I think it's Durston, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
Yeah. They played Cliff Smith instead. I think that'll be a switch that happens next week for sure. They probably only going to ever dress 6 forwards, and they have 4 lefties and 3 righties. So I think between Cliff and Jordan, that they'll find the right fit. And this week it wasn't Cliff. Yeah, he wasn't banging bodies, kind of like they thought he would. So he'll probably be sitting next week to experiment and try and make some corrections on offense and see how that goes.
All right. We will move on to our predictions from last week, and I guess if Tyler didn't want to talk too much about the Vancouver game, we don't really want to talk too much about our predictions either, because none of us did that great a job. I got the Buffalo game right, and that was it for me. Tyler got the Colorado game right, and that was it for him. And Melissa didn't get anything. So between the 3 of us, we got 2 picks correct. So that's not so good. So like I said, me and Tyler were 1-3. Melissa was 0-4. Overall, all 3 of us are now 2-4 on the season. So let's turn that around this week.
We're all so smart, that means it's a really topsy-turvy season.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, now that said, like I said on Twitter the other day, that Colorado's 2-0, and New England and Georgia have won, and Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary haven't. I'm not sure anybody would have really predicted any of those, but it's early, and these kind of crazy things happen in this league. So I'll quickly go over Melissa's picks, because she made her picks before she was, she wasn't available tonight, but she did make some picks. 6 games this coming week, so lots to go on. Rochester and Toronto play a home and home on Friday and Saturday. Sorry, Thursday and Saturday, I believe it is. She picked Rochester for both. She also picked Calgary over New England, Saskatchewan over Vancouver, Buffalo over Colorado, and Georgia over New England. I think that one's on Saturday. So I'll go over mine quickly. I'm going to go with Toronto in the Toronto game, and then Rochester in Rochester, so each team winning at home. New England Calgary took me a while. I didn't really know where to go with this one. Kind of the same as last year. Can you believe Calgary would go 0-3? No, I can't believe that, so I'll have to pick them to win. But and I don't think they look terrible against the Bandits. I didn't see much of it. I just saw the odd highlight here and there. But New England looked really good last week. Now they looked really good in their first couple of games last year as well, and then they just tanked the rest of the season. But I'm gonna go with New England on this one. Vancouver, Saskatchewan, defending champs versus a team that got blown out on Saturday. Not much of a question there. I'm going with Saskatchewan. Buffalo, Colorado was also a tough one. Colorado's looking good, and like you said, scored 16 goals in each of their first couple of games. So I'm going to go with the Mammoth on that one. And New England and Georgia, I like the way the Swarm looked last weekend. The New England offense looked pretty good as well, but Georgia looked. Like I said, I think we're just gonna have a lot of fun watching those guys play. So I'm going to go with Georgia on that one. Tyler, you can do yours, and then Ryan will get you to to make a couple of calls as well, just for fun.
Sure. So, yeah, the home and home with Rochester and Toronto. I'm going to go with a split, and the home team will win each game. I don't have a solid read on either one just yet, so I imagine that'll just play out. I don't know. New England really impressed me. Seeing them live and the big defense and the quick acclimation to having Sean Evans quarterback their offense. So I have them beating Calgary. Calgary has to travel cross country 2 weeks in a row. That's going to wear them down, and that was a deciding factor for me there. No reason for the Rush to not beat Vancouver. Imagine they're going to do some sort of banner-raising ceremony, which will be incredibly awkward. Here's your new team, here's their title and the cup, and how do people have any sort of emotional attachment to that? But the Rush will be up for it. They'll be in a good mood and go take it out on the Stealth there. Buffalo traveling to Colorado. Well, Colorado's a scoring machine right now, and let's see that carry forward. And I got Colorado beating Buffalo. And again, New England impressed me, and I have them beating Georgia. I'm glad Georgia's got another home game right away to get the fans back. They may not win that game, in my opinion, but it's good to have the team show up, play, and play immediately, and then take a break versus play and then not come back for a month, and people are like, oh yeah, I forgot about them. It's good scheduling by the league there to help the new team get some ties with the community. So yeah, we're gonna have Ryan go. It sounds like, Graeme.
Sure.
Yeah, so Rochester and Toronto, they're going to play that home and home. I'm going to take Toronto in both of those games. I think they took a bad loss in that Week 2 matchup against Georgia, and I think they're going to redeem themselves with the 2 wins. Calgary, New England. I know New England had an explosive game against Vancouver, but I just like the way Calgary plays, and they have a very veteran-like offense and defense. I think even with the loss of Sean Evans, I think they can pull this one out. Vancouver against Saskatchewan. I'm going to have to take Saskatchewan. Vancouver had a really bad loss, and I just don't see them rebounding. Moving on to Buffalo and Colorado. Buffalo didn't really impress me a whole lot in that home opener. The offense was just out of whack a little bit, and Colorado's been explosive in the 2 games they've played so far, so I'm going to take Colorado in that game. And then New England versus Georgia. That's a tough one. I think that's going to be a really fun game, but I just like the way Georgia's offense looked. A lot of chemistry, a lot of great ball movement. So I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair, but I'm going to take Georgia in that one.
All right. I guess that will about do it for the show today. So just a couple of games to talk about in the new commish. Not much more in the way of news. So Ryan, thanks a lot for joining us. Where can people find you online?
Well, currently I'm a columnist and beat reporter in Lacrosse We Trust, so you can check out all my articles there. I'll be covering mainly the Buffalo Bandits and some Rochester Nighthawks coverage. You can also find me on YouTube at Big Z Lacrosse Network. I also trying to work out a podcast on SoundCloud, an audio podcast, so you can check me out there as well. And I'm doing some local coverage here in Buffalo on news, just community news in general. So yeah, thanks for having me again.
Excellent. So you're all over the place.
There you go.
All right. So addictedtolacrosse.com is where you want to go for all of our previous shows. One thing I didn't mention off the top, we are now officially a podcast. So if you go to iTunes and do a search for Addicted to Lacrosse, you will find us. You can then subscribe to the podcast that way. You can leave a review. You can give us a rating. So any of those things would be much appreciated. If you want to get hold of us, Lax Podcast on Twitter is probably the easiest way. We're also on Facebook at Lax Podcast and feedback at addictedtolacrosse.com if you want to email. And that's about it. Hopefully we will get all three of us available next week. But until then, this has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa and Ryan, I'm Graeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.